Good evening. Today I'm going to be talking about how to find the one. This is the first part in a multi-part series. Thank you for joining me. There's quite a few things that I could actually mean by finding the one. One, of course, could mean finding the loved one that you want, finding that one person that you love intensely and will love intensely for the rest of your life. That's something that doesn't have to be a dream. I think that it's something that's very obtainable. So, how to find the one, as in how to find a soulmate kind of idea in your life. Another, how to find the one, is how to find your true self. The one, as in your one, as in who you are. And how to find the one, as in an idea, a very real, very practical idea of God and who you are in accordance with that. Okay, so let's begin. Okay, we're going to begin at the beginning, which is where you should always start. And I think that the beginning of finding the one, whether it's finding the one God, finding the one self, finding the one you love, finding the best pet, finding the one. How is that done? And I believe that that is done by first being the one. I feel that you first have to be something that not only you love, but will be loved. And when you are somebody that's loved, that will be loved, that love comes to you. And I think that that starts with uh, kind of like a doing and a being. Being is like a combination of behavior and uh, posture towards subject. Finding the self is necessary to even get. If you're looking for yourself and you have another in your life and you're looking for yourself, then how could you ever know another if you don't know yourself? So truly, the search for another begins with the self. One must find themselves before they are able to truly find another. We may have people join our life for a time, and we might not even know that they're truly there. With them in our life is just an image of what we think them to be. So it's essentially an illusion. Uh, you have to know yourself before you can really even be with another at all in a true form. And this journey is it's a fun one. Finding the self, it's a fun one, and it's full of a lot of uh, full of a lot of koans. It's full of a lot of little puzzles and exercises. Uh, One may say that the act of looking for themselves in its nature is a koan. Where are you? If you are not you right now, right here, how are you looking for you? How can you be anything else other than you right now? Uh, Through adolescence, we look for different images or personas to create ourselves in. And you can come across ideas and people and platforms to be in, to stand upon, to be part of. And you try something about that feels good, whether it's an aspect of it or near totality of it. But then eventually you immerse into it, and you may find out that some of it's not exactly it's not all peaches and cream. There's typically what you'll find is that with everything there's like a work that has to be done. Not everything's just going to be a parade of happiness. I guess that even the parade of happiness was going to require a certain amount of work. And so that work is going to exist with everything. It seems that there's a certain amount of effort that's required to achieve anything. And so trying to get away from that, to not have to do that work, put forth that effort, it doesn't stop the work from having to get done. What it does is it pushes the work back. So that you're not doing the work right now, but you're going to have to pay interest on it. The work doesn't go away; it gets worse. So what you do is you don't run from the work. You don't resist the work. You do it. You dive into it. In this regard, the work that we're talking about is actually self-discovery. Because just as you're you, and how can you be any other you other than the you that you are? How is that? How do you discover that? Well, you don't know you and how you are in every single situation. We really don't. We might think we do, but until you're stuck in a situation, you don't really know how you're going to react. A lot of times we want to think we're going to be some kind of, hero or do the right thing all the time, but a lot of times that's not exactly how it plays out. Things can play out a lot different than that. And so finding the self, I don't think can be done simply through theoretics. I think to truly find the self, I think you have to go out there and actually do a lot of various work. I think it's inevitable. I think you have to do the work in order to experience it. To actually see. There's this data that, this accumulative data that happens with experience. You accumulate this data. And how you cope with the data is it's personality forming. Because you see how you did this time, and a lot of times we're just kind of creating an image as we go. And so because we're just creating an image, we're kind of always trying to go from what we had before. So you're going to want to be congruent. That means that you're going to want to be the same as, maybe in harmony with. You're going to want to you're going to want to keep your behavioral traits congruent with your perceived self-image. Because of that, sometimes you might end up doing things that that's the first step to making some mistakes, I would think, is that You get into territory where, well, I made this decision this way because I'm a Cardinals fan, so I've got to make all these decisions that are kind of like that, like how a Cardinals fan would make it. Well, that's not being a Cardinals fan. That's trying to look like a Cardinals fan. You might actually be a Cardinals fan. You know what I'm saying? You might actually enjoy that team or whatever. But that's not, focusing on people thinking that you're a Cardinals fan is not being a Cardinals fan. Being a Cardinals fan is just being immersed in the game and just wondering what happens next in the game. And you hardly even know, you're not thinking about people thinking about you. You're in the game, watching the game, seeing what's going to happen next. That's being a Cardinals fan. And so likewise, being the self is not it's not a scripted text. Being the self is a sense of not knowing. That's, there's a real sense to that because it's in the action. So then, how do you find that true self? How do you know what that is so that you can have some sort of predictive control over what's going to happen in your life? Otherwise, you're just kind of at this whim of emotions and feelings, and then you end up doing things and being around people that are maladaptive for you. You want conscious directive control over your life. Otherwise, you end awry. So anybody that's really gone out and done much, I think would rightly agree with me that if you aren't focusing on what you're doing, most of the time, stuff's going to get messed up. Painting is a perfect example of that. If you're trying to paint a very detailed scene, you can't just throw paint without looking. You got to really do it detailed, If you're trying to make a splash mark, you just kind of splash it on there. Right now, I'm actually kind of putting some highlights on the top of this thought bubble kind of thing that's going on over here in this section. Did that. I think I'm going to have to get some more titanium white. This one's about out. And it looks like I touched some like red or something with it. It's got, or maybe I put the red cap on this one. I got a bunch of red paint on the tip of my titanium white. It's about out, but I probably got some more titanium around here somewhere. I like to use a lot of titanium white. Covers well. Okay, so what is this self? Here's how I define the self. It's you. It's me. It's everything. The self, according to several sciences, if you really look at what the implications are behind a lot of these findings in science, in particular biology, neurology, and physics. If we look at these scientific fields, what we find is that there's some pretty empirical evidence that this happening, this life, this existence, yourself, this environmental field, It is you. You are it. You're part of it. And a lot of different things have been done. There's a lot of experiments that have happened that have pretty much shown with great evidence that we do have effect on things, and that things do have effect on one another outside of space and time. And so with this scientific finding of what the self is, there's an awareness that can come over one. And I think that the awareness that can come over us that should really come into light and give study of the self is the awareness of subconscious. And that's kind of an oxymoron, awareness of subconscious. And in that, look at that. I don't think we can ever really be aware of subconscious directly. I think that by trying to directly interact with the subconscious, that becomes the conscious mind. Reading the conscious and reading the subconscious is like they're two different books. The conscious mind is a very overt, perceptive tool that looks for overt stimulus, whereas the subconscious mind operates more on an intellect level, to where it approximates data and patterns. It uses that, and that's just one aspect of the subconscious. See, I think the subconscious is further divided into other categories, such as the subconscious brain and then the subconscious environment. There's a lot that can be read from the subconscious environment. This is something a lot of Westerners living behind the confines of Walmart are not going to readily perceive. But if you get out into the tribal peoples of the world and you look at shamans and you look at the various tribal peoples of the world who are extremely in tune with reality, it would almost seem that they directly communicate with various elements of reality, because they recognize the patterns. They know what things mean, and they're in tune with it. Whereas if you don't have awareness of something and you're not in tune with it, then it's foreign to you and you don't know. So there's a hack around this. There is a way to become connected to the subconscious. See, you never were disconnected. I think that's the first step in that, is to realize you never were disconnected from your subconscious. Your focus attention was not placed on it. Your subconscious is always recording and talking and kind of guiding along. And I think that the subconscious of the body needs to also be further divided into other categories. So now we're going to get into some of my own real personal theory right now. The subconscious can be divided into as many categories. The human brain has quite a few different lobes that can operate independently. Primarily, I'm talking about the left and right hemispheres. The left and right hemispheres essentially have automated control independently of the total body. Even there's left brain and right brain people. Okay, so in between the two hemispheres, there's also something. It's called the corpus callosum. It binds the two hemispheres together. It functions as a junction for the information between the two. This can almost be thought of as its own little brain. And then you get into the cerebellum, which is essentially the motor control center of the body, which has its own little kind of automated functions that it does. It thinks its own little thoughts. It wants its own little things. But there's something even deeper than all of this, than what neurology has told us. Something far deeper. In the neurological field, there is some questions as to where some of the neurotransmitters come from. We don't know how certain neurotransmitters exist in the human body. Like it was unknown. We know that they do, but we don't know where they're being generated from. And this is kind of cutting edge science. There actually is a lot of science behind this, a lot of people that would back me up with scientific studies. But this is kind of something you might want to sit down for this one, pun intended. There are more bacteria in you and on you than there is the cells of you. These bacteria, upon their respiration and death and birth, through their life process, they are releasing a variety of chemicals. These chemicals, some of them are benign to the human body. You merely pass them through. Some of them are mal to the body. They will actually hurt you. They're actually poisons. You actually have bacteria in your body that produce ethanol, produce alcohol through, just naturally. A certain amount, it's a pretty low amount, but it still happens. And there's also bacteria in your guts that produce neurotransmitters. So if you followed what I said there, folks, a lot of times what you're craving to eat and a lot of your cravings and a lot of desires, a lot of these neurotransmitters that we don't know where they're produced, that are in the body, that affect the brain, that affect your mood, that affect what you want to do and where you go and who you associate with in a lot of different ways. They just might come from the gut, in the bacteria in your gut. Okay. So these bacteria, they communicate with you the same way that they communicate with each other. They use chemicals to communicate with their environment and themselves and each other. They're chemical-based communicators. And so they communicate with you also, their host. We are their host. In fact, one could say that maybe we are just a colony of bacteria. Who knows? So they release various chemicals into our bloodstream that interact with how we feel about things. So getting in contact with yourself is a little bit more than just knowing how you're going to act. If you really want to know your true self and know what you're going to do, you have to be in full control of your entire bacterial spectrum, which is controlled through your diet and your environment and your sleep cycle. These bacteria are they have the same sleep cycles as us. So there's a lot to knowing the self. I think that the bacterial interaction is kind of minimal. I think that a lot of the neurotransmitters produced by these little critters are, I think that they are not like controlling. They don't make you do things, but they will, they affect your mood some. They're going to affect things. They do have an effect. It's a neurotransmitter that they're releasing. So that's a pretty potent thing. Neurotransmitters are pretty potent. Ask any psychiatrist, and they'll readily agree with me. So it's not to be disregarded. It's something to be taken into consideration. But there is something that can be done to know the self better, to have the self kind of under control, and some of the work to do with that is conceptual. And let's kind of get into some of that work now. The parts of the self that we have a very conscious, that we can do something that's practical, that means something right now, that we can actually do something about right now, is the body, is the mind, is the spirit. One could divide these into different categories. I see them as all one thing. I see the body, the mind, the soul. I see that as all one thing. That's all just, consciousness, which is what we are essentially, which is the soul. If you want to say the soul is a material, it's consciousness. Is it's generated by the body, by the complexity of pattern arranged in your body, in your mind, in your brain, in your heart, and all that stuff. That complexity it generates essentially a portal that your consciousness is able to interact with reality through. So you can have some real conscious influence over these things. This is where you can actually kind of, where you can do some practical work, where you can see some growth in. You can't control what the bacteria are farting in your gut. You can't do none of that. I mean, you kind of can, in that you can control what you're eating, you can control when you sleep, you can control what you're drinking, but you're not going to be able to change what those things do. They're kind of a fixed structure, saying if they have them at a certain amount, then they're going to react with you a certain way. So you keep yourself away from certain things, or you introduce yourself to certain things, depending on which one. I do not have this all mapped out. I don't know which bacteria do what. It's a pretty big map. There's a lot of them there. But if we give kind of when you really get used to doing the full self and being the full self, you kind of start to get this hang of it. There's like, and it goes like this. A lot of times you're going to be doing what you don't what you don't want to do. So like there's this part of you that it will exist that like just kind of wants to do nothing and sit on the couch and eat potato chips and blame everybody else for your problems, right? We'll call it the bad guy, or Satan, right? Or or the advocate, or the there's a lot of different names you could put to this happening, this thing that happens. Is that you'll try to talk yourself down out of this effort that you're putting into yourself. And you tell yourself, oh, I don't need to monitor this much of my sleep. I don't need to do that exercise. I don't need to do this. If you've ever quit cigarettes, you'll notice that the same tone, that the voice that told you to smoke cigarettes is the same tone that's going to tell you to stay up late and eat junk food. And that guy, that we'll just call it a guy, that guy that wanted you to smoke cigarettes, well, cigarettes are bad for you. I think everybody can agree on that without even yeah, everybody agrees, right? Cigarettes are bad. Well, what you'll notice is that these things that are maladaptive, they have the same tone to them. They're all going to kind of sound the same, if you will. And if you want to get to the point where you like assign voices to these urges, which is what happens a lot of times, a lot of people would, because if you disconnect from your from your total aspects of self, and you think that you're just this little locus of control, what has been called the ego, this little like centrum of desires. Because if you look at the ego, that's all it really is just it wants this, it wants that. It's like a desire generator. If you've identified your total self with that, then there's going to be a lot of what happens in you that like you have to put the blame elsewhere. But it's still you doing it. It's just you're telling yourself that it's not you. It doesn't change reality. It just there is a true reality. I've heard a lot of people talking about like this everything is just a subjective reality, and I don't believe that. I think that there is a true reality. I think that it is possible to obtain pragmatic assertion of your reality. And it really all starts with the self. In order to delve into the self and find true borders and boundaries of the self, you have to be truly honest with yourself. You can't be lying about how you feel about yourself. You can't be lying about what you're doing. You have to tell yourself the real truth. If you don't, you won't be able to do any of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's almost like you can almost tell somebody's level of self-honesty by how far they get in a lot of my lessons. Because if they don't get very far, what's stopping them? Always what's stopping them is a level of self-honesty. I mean, I don't have an exact statistic to give you of like all these people that say I'm full of it and don't want to listen to what I'm saying. It's this many. But what I've noticed is that it's typically that way, is that the only resistance that people have to my teachings is that they don't want to stop lying to themselves about something. And that's understandable because, self-image a lot of times is dependent. A lot of times people will base their self-image off their accomplishments. And accomplishments are typically ego-driven. So if you're basing your, and you've identified, typically, if you've done that, you've identified yourself as that locus of control, that centrum of decision making, right? If that's what you've identified, if that's all you've identified, then it's going to be really hard when something it goes against your viewpoint. In almost any ways, you'd be surprised at how staunch people will come against this little tiny philosophical viewpoints that don't even have any real bearing on things. Like flat earthers are extremely, like, this is super common in flat earthers. In fact, I've been talking to people and I've seen how they've interacted with what I've said to them. And I've called them out. I've been like, "You're a flat earther, aren't you?" Like, I could tell that they were flat earther by how they were reacting to what I was saying. And I wasn't even talking about physics or anything other than, I think I was actually talking about neurology or perception or something. I was talking about a completely different subject other than physics. And I could tell that this person was going to, about how they reacted to what I said, that they were going to deny a certain, because they weren't telling themselves the truth. And that's really the first thing. And maybe it's just that, this whole enlightenment thing, this whole being an enlightened person, whatever that could be. I think the truest measure of that would be self-honesty. That's how you can really tell a person's enlightened, because like, you take somebody that's really enlightened, let's take let's throw out a big dog, Jesus. Okay. You take Jesus and you put that dude up on the cross, man, and he was hurting. It says it in the scriptures. He was, take me down. He was not feeling good. But that dude was enlightened as all get. If you listen to what he said and how he reacted to the emotional display of the hierarchy around him, that dude was high level. I don't care if you believe in Savior or nothing. You can't say that Jesus wasn't enlightened. Like, he was an enlightened person. He handled his emotions like a champ. And if you really look at a lot of things, he was very honest with himself about stuff. He's very honest about things. He spoke kind of cryptically, but that's just because Aramaic was a very cryptic language, I think. The language that he spoke at that time in that area, where he came from, that language in that area was very, like, they didn't have a lot of words for things. It was like, it was almost, I don't want to say primitive to give it a bad context, but it was kind of a primitive language that had a lot of new technology being introduced to it. And so they had a lot of roundabout ways of saying things, and there was a couple other reasons to that too, social reasons behind why the language was the way it was. But, and so, what is being enlightened? Is being enlightened, standing there and getting hit in the head with a rock and acting like it don't hurt? Or is enlightened not getting your head by a rock, not sitting there? What is enlightened? I think that one of the things that would just be self-honesty, that's the most practical. That's what matters the most. That's what's going to wage the most in how they interact with other people, how they're going to interact with themselves, is that level of self-honesty that they've allowed themselves to achieve. And I think it's just that if you and even one of the secrets, one of my secrets of integrating with the self is just that you can't do it. You can't integrate with the self. You trying to do it is going to make it not happening. You know, if it was something, if fully integrating with the self was something you could do under conscious control, we'd be figuring it out by the age of 6. It'd be a trick that everybody could do. They'd be all like, everybody, like self-fulfilling prophecies would hardly exist. Like that notion would hardly exist. And in that, when you become integrated with yourself, you totally see self-fulfilling prophecies. Like you'll find people and you'll start interacting with them and you'll be like, you'll totally see, they'll like tell you. They won't even know that they tell you. They'll tell you stuff and then you can just kind of repeat it back to them and they'll think you're reading their mind because they're so disconnected with their true desires and their true self. They're so disconnected that some people you can like listen to what they're saying and reply back to them with just kind of like you listen to what they're saying and you just kind of listen to what they're actually saying. And I'm having troubles generating an example for you right now, but it plays true. I've seen it play true so many times. The technique it actually has a term. It's called cold reading. You know, you get somebody up there and you get them talking and you get them comfortable and you be like, okay, you're a 16-year-old boy and you're dressed antisocial. So you're probably into this, that, and the other thing that antisocial 16-year-old boys are into. And so then you kind of mention something and then they talk and then you listen to how they talk. Be like, okay, they talked bad or good about emo stuff. Okay, they talked bad about emo stuff. So they're not an emo, but they're a 16-year-old boy that's this way. So they probably like punk rock or something or whatever non-emo. You see what I'm saying? You're starting to get the idea, I'm sure. It's called cold reading. The reason why cold reading exists is because people are so disconnected from their true self. It's very, very, very challenging to cold read somebody that's integrated with themselves or is on that path. Somebody that's on the path of self-integration. It's going to be more and more challenging to Jedi mind trick them, if you will. I think that's a great term. I love that term because the movie's kind of cool. And it's also like, kind of gives it like a mythological feeling. But really what you're doing is you just recognize patterns. You know what I'm saying? It's based on your experience and you read your intuition. There is a reading of intuition in it. So it's pretty cool. You know, it's super easy to Jedi mind trick people that are not integrated with themselves. They don't know what they're really wanting. You know, like their desires and their notions just kind of start to bubble up inside of them, and they're like stuck on this almost like victim side of themselves. Like, oh, I'm starting to have that feeling again. What is that feeling? Oh, I remember that feeling. That feeling is eating a cheeseburger. I want to eat a cheeseburger. Now it's time to eat a cheeseburger. You know, and a lot of times these people won't even want to begin to hear this because there's like this pride that gets kicked in. Like, oh man, my whole life I was just kind of being pushed around. Like I was never really in control the whole time. I was always just like a balloon bouncing from one side to the next, just waiting for something to tell me what to do. And you know, here's the hard bullet. Yeah, bite it. That's what you were. You're just a slave. We're all just slaves. You know, that's just the truth. No matter how free we think we are, you can't. There's freedom doesn't exist. Real, true, absolute freedom is like the vacuum of space. There is no up or down or all around. It's not comfortable. So you find the prison that's comfortable. That's really what it boils down to. You know, the prison that's comfortable for me is that I get to tell myself where I go and what I eat and when I sleep and who I associate with. You know what I'm saying? That's the prison that's comfortable for me. Some people are more comfortable with, you know, they don't want to have that that control. They want to think that life is an automated event, so that they feel like they're on a ride. A lot of times people don't want to be, they want to, a lot of times we just want to be on a ride. We just want to just kind of get coasted along and have everything kind of provided for us. I don't know if that's like because of like efficiency, because people want to be efficient. It's a very efficient methodology for economy, is to just kind of ride along and get what's coming to you. You don't have to exert energy to get things. So maybe there's a little bit of a natural biology drive to be this drive towards efficiency like that. I can see where that would play in. And so when you start to know that about yourself, you can start to read yourself. You know what I'm saying? You start to see patterns like, okay, well, every time I get lazy like this in my life, these events occur. Every time I get too lazy and leave the garbage in the house, cockroaches come in. So eventually you start taking the garbage out in intervals that prevent the growth of fungus or whatever it is, whatever problem. You start to maintain. Really what it boils down to is you're honest with yourself and you maintain. Because when you're honest with yourself, you see this needs to be done, this needs to be done, this needs to be done, and I'm the only one that can do it. And then you commit yourself to those things. You create a plan and you commit yourself to those things. That's being the self. That's being the true self. You say, oh, okay, I'm having these desires and I'm having these urges, and they mean this, and those mean that. This is my main goal. These are not going to help me achieve my main goal. Those are going to help me achieve my main goal. So I'm going to listen and promote these urges more. That's about the most high-level self that we can truly obtain. It's just kind of like reading the cards. Be like, okay, this is the deck that I got dealt. Today I'm hungry for chocolate and salmon and I don't know, pork rinds or watermelon. Watermelon. I don't even like pork rinds. Watermelon, dude. Like, really what I want snap peas, some nice fresh snap peas, and some and some of those little shoots that come up. I eat these little shoots off the plant from radishes. So I want some radishes and snap peas and watermelon, right? And so then you go through your day and you're like, okay, how am I going to obtain? Okay, I can't obtain these things fresh. I have to find this other route to obtain these nutrients because my body is wanting this stuff. And then there's also existential sides to that. Like you have a constant drive to share yourself with others. So then you take the steps to do that. You don't deny that. You say, oh, I have a constant drive to share myself with others. Well, then you ascertain, okay, I'm somebody that's just wanting to go out and hurt people's feelings for thinking what I think is the wrong thing. Well, that's maladaptive. And if you're honest with yourself, you're like, okay, this is maladaptive behavior. I shouldn't do this. So then what you want to do is you want to examine that. You had a maladaptive drive, so you examine it. Why am I wanting to do this? And you be honest with yourself. Why are you wanting to? Oh, I want to make these people feel bad because that makes me feel better about myself. Makes me feel like my accomplishments mean something, or my plight in life is justified. And if you're honest with yourself, like you'll see that sometimes a lot of these things are just like despicable. Like, man, I don't want to be like that. And then you don't do it. You know what I'm saying? When you identify something as maladaptive, you don't do it. Personally, I found out in my integration that I had a lot of very maladaptive traits that I had introduced into my total being. I had allowed myself to alter my sleep patterns in ways that were maladaptive. I had allowed myself to alter my posture in ways that were maladaptive. I altered my social stance in ways that were maladaptive. I was becoming like an anarchist. That's maladaptive. And if you're honest with yourself and you really look at things, it becomes very easy. You just got to take the steps. You just got to do it. And what is the mind? There's something we don't know about the mind. We want to think the mind is the brain. Well, we got a lot of different brains. Your heart even kind of has its own little brain. Kind of, it's this little brain essentially on the heart that kind of tells it what to do. It's like a little control center, if you will. It's just like it has similar neural connections to the cerebellum. It's more like a motor control center. It's not really like a logics processing center like the frontal cortex is like a logics processing center. It's able to arrange electrochemical inputs in a way to create structures that can actually make memory, where it doesn't, like the brain and the heart doesn't make memory like that. But you can still utilize all these things. There's still information there that you can utilize through analyzing patterns. Through analyzing patterns under a highly honest state, I think that you'll rapidly get to know yourself. Because what you find rapidly is that you're creating yourself. Yourself in the past don't exist. You're carrying it with you if you choose to. If you choose to go about thinking, oh, I'm this kind of person, and I made those decisions, and I'm a bad person now, and you label yourself negatively, and then what happens? Then, in order to not feel cognitive dissonance, you might actually start living up to that. You might actually start being a bad person to make your thoughts congruent with your self-image. And then we see the mechanism behind self-fulfilling prophecies and self-destructive behaviors. It's very evident. It's painful to see, and how much of that is prevalent in society. It's unbelievable. When you start really looking at it, you'll see how maladaptive some of the elements in society are. That's okay. You don't look down. You don't look down on these people rushing around from here to there, letting themselves get pushed around and thinking they need more. You don't put these people down. You got to always remember, you got to be honest with yourself. It's easy to get caught up in this rat race. It's easy to get trapped in the ego, which isn't even a real thing. The ego, where does it exist? Other than it's this like creation. It's like, really? The ego gets happy sometimes. Like the ego gets happy when it's getting something. But when the ego is in its normal being, I think that the ego in its normal state is like the essence of unhappiness. And I say that because of this. The ego is a sense of not havingness. It's dependent on individuality in this way. And individuality, the essence of individuality is separation. So the ego focuses on how much of an individual it is. It's very valuable for survival. When you're getting chased or when you're defending against attack, ego's very valuable for those things. It will tell you to duck. It will tell you get down. It will tell there's value in these things. That's why they're there. That's why they've lasted this long. But when you're not getting chased anymore, when you have all the food you need, when you have the homeostasis necessary to sustain your life in a productive, fulfilling way, the ego becomes useless. At that point, the ego is only going to drag you down. It's going to, you'll wake up at 3:30 in the morning and be like, oh man, I hope that comment that I made to that person on YouTube, man, I hope they don't think that I'm this way now. I hope that person doesn't think that I'm a sexist because I made that comment about that woman. There's some good to that. That's kind of, so there's some empathetic stuff behind that, right? It's good to take in consideration what other people feel and think, but not at 3:30 in the morning. You know what I'm saying? Not days after the event. Not days after the event about somebody that you don't even know, that you won't know, that like had like a fictitious name on YouTube. Like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's so irrelevant to be thinking about this stuff. And then you got to ask yourself this question: is that making you happy? Is thinking about that, does that make you happy? And almost always what you're going to find out is the ego is not making you happy. This algorithm of thought, which we call the ego, this algorithm of thought that's focused on individuality, that thought, does that make you happy? Man, I mean, I guess I like, I've had some really cool times, what I'm saying? I've done some really cool things in my life where it was like really badass, what I'm saying? Where like people were like clapping, like, yeah, whoa, cool. You know what I'm saying? So right there, that felt really cool. I was like, yeah, wow, that was cool. Look at me. You know what I'm saying? It kind of had that like, I did something cool kind of feeling, glory, what I'm saying? Like that little feeling of glory. But that oasis of glory, this little tiny puddle, this little drip of glory comes from the ocean of misery, right? Of strife and struggle and not having enough and being like, I want more. And the fear that's associated with the individuality, that's associated with ego and what I'm talking about here. There's this real fear. And does that make you happy? A lot of times it's hard to ask yourself that question because we get stuck in the feeling of it. Like, oh, all I can think about right now is how he has a better motorcycle than me and he thinks he's better than me because of that. That doesn't matter. It matters. It literally isn't even matter. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it's cheese or metal or some kind of substance. It's just thoughts. You're just thinking the shit. And it's making you feel bad. Right? It's maladaptive. So you stop doing it. It's like, how do you stop doing it? There's techniques for that. That's if you look at a lot of monks' life, a lot of their life pattern is based around techniques of becoming egolessness, of being in that state of not thinking of self in that way. And so, there's a lot of different techniques for getting out of that ego. But that ego is not the self. It is a component, but it's not the self. And when you identify with that as the total self, you're going down a long road. It's going to be really hard. It's going to suck. One thing that I think is a really valuable technique in self-discovery, there's this way of programming your mind to kind of play a movie for yourself. It requires high levels of self-honesty, and there's quite a few techniques and exercises that I went through before I got proficient at what I call the house technique. But it's a way of discovering the self in a very like real time, of packing a whole lot of data of the self into a couple little snips of time. And first, the first work is with the self-honesty thing. You have to really be honest with yourself, because if you're not going to know when you're making the house how you want to see yourself, and when you're letting the house be made from who you are. But it's essentially that you create a house in your mind of who you are. You literally give your brain, and you got to be, there's a what I call the oceanic state of mind. It's when your brain is not labeling things based on the locus of control that the ego is centered in. It's allowing information to come and pass through it. It's akin to how an infant's mind would operate. There's a lot of different techniques for developing a way to get into the flow state. I'm going to go over that eventually as well. That's like a 3.5 hour long lecture to get through the flow state. But even all this is about getting to the flow state. You have to do all this. You have to be honest with yourself. Otherwise you get stuck in this realm of not knowing if you're creating it or perceiving it going to happen. That's another thing that gets alleviated with self-truth. Self-truth at its fullest. The question of, am I making it happen, or did I just perceive it going to happen? Am I reading the future, or am I creating the future? It all becomes evident. That question's gone. You know what's going on. And there's a reason why you don't know what's going on for sure right away easily. It's because it's both things. It's a combination of both. But I think that the biggest thing that thwarts people from seeing this truth, because this is a truth, I know it, is they don't want to admit to themselves the full aspect of self. One of the hardest things for me in admitting the full truth of self to Ivan was that I wanted to think that I was like strong and like powerful and beautiful and worth a bunch or something. And but that truth becomes it's I almost don't want to say much more in that regards, because I don't want to ruin your self-truth. There's something that you see when you get really honest with yourself, and that's a journey in it for everybody. But when you have to be honest with yourself, that's how you see the truth. And it's just that easy. And it's real self-honesty, where you have to really be paying attention. You have to really be quiet. And it's not about what you want. And I guess maybe to give a rule of thumb on that, is there's this world that exists. It's a very real world that exists for almost everybody, almost all the time. It's the world of that which you do not wish to know. When you're not honest with yourself, there is a very, very real realm called that which you do not wish to know. You'll try to protect it. You'll try to defend it. You'll do anything you can to not look at it. But there's a lot to learn from it. If you're in contact with it, a lot of the questions that you have can go away. It's not that there aren't new questions generated, mind you. That's one thing. About the rabbit hole. You are the rabbit. The rabbit goes as deep as you dig it. This is the escape from the matrix. You're not going to dig your way out. You're as far out from the matrix as you can be. You're so far out from the matrix that it looks like you're not part of it from here. You're so free from the matrix right now that it feels like all your decisions are only your own. But they're not. They're not. You can't get completely free of the matrix. The matrix is you. The matrix, being the total conglomerate of all of the complexities of existence, is you. If you escape that, it's nothing. Further out is no thing. Further in is all thing. This is the middle ground between that, if you will. The materialized state. it's not easy to it's not easy to be honest with the self. The ego has a very, very real defense mechanism that will thwart your plans. So make sure that if you're planning on becoming enlightened, do not make announcements, because you'll hear it and you'll thwart yourself. You'll put booby traps in your way, because that ego has a variable. That ego is an algorithm, right? It's all, basically everything is just like an algebraic equation, right? And so it has variables in it, and one of the variables in the ego is self. Oh, excuse me. Oh, I just had it. It's my eye, and I forgot what I was saying. The ego has a self-defense mechanism in its variable, in this very foundation of its existence, of what makes it exist, is a component of the drive to exist, right? That's one of the fundamental drives that kind of well up the ego-ness, is that drive to exist and to be. And so, like, along with that is known. And how are you known to exist? You have to have components looking at you to be known. Knowing you exist is just a singular point, but to be known, you have to have something looking at you. So what's funny? Here's one of the very funny, odd things about the ego. The ego, as much as it wants to be alone, needs everything else to even kind of exist. Without everything else, there is no ego, because it only knows itself by having something else that's not it. And so if you reside in this egotistical format, if you allow that algorithm, your brain, to run that algorithm over and over and over again, well, then you're going to be in an egotistical state. And it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be happy. It's going to suck. Sometimes it'll be cool because you'll win or something. But for the most part, it's just going to suck. It's just going to be like a continual not gettingness. So you want to get rid of that. You want to get rid of that ego. It's not ever really going to help much. But that's just a koan, really. That's just a koan, man. That's just an exercise. It's just kind of like entertainment. You don't have to do anything. You know what I'm saying? Life is about existing. There's no finite goal. You know what I'm saying? There's no one at the finish line waiting with a counting card. Saying you didn't make it in and you made it in. There's no one there doing that ain't you. It's only you that's doing it. And if you're doing it to yourself, you can stop doing it. But here's the thing, though, about entertainment, man. Here's the weird thing about entertainment, is that entertainment has ups and downs. Entertainment is not just laughter. Entertainment is not eternal bliss. Entertainment is the character starts out kind of weak and stupid and then gets stronger. Or the character's a hero and he's really powerful, he's the number one character, and then he gets hurt or has to learn something new or finds a new enemy and has to grow and da da da. Essentially, long story short, there are no stories without conflicts. I tried for some time to generate stories without conflicts, and I failed. I wasn't able to really generate any kind of story that didn't have some sort of conflict, some sort of up and down, some sort of end result. That's what a story is. So, liberation, there's lots of different forms of liberation that people seek after. I don't think it exists. I think the best thing that we can do is make yourself badass so that your right now is really cool. So that you have a lot of attributes and a lot of options in life right now. That's what matters. And if you get to know yourself in a very full, real way, you're not going to be maladaptive to your relationships. You're not going to be maladaptive to your job site. You're not going to be self-sabotaging. There are events that can happen that's just kind of like a boulder coming out of the sky and slamming into you. But for the most part, the bad stuff that happens in our life is pretty much us doing it to ourselves in one way or another. That's what I just put on there. I'm going to do a bunch to it when it dries. But I got to put I'm going to have to touch it up. I'm going to put a border on it. And I left it real rough because I want that border to be, I'm going to grow a border on it. I'm going to cure it. I'm going to put another color in there on the border. And then I'm going to put another one on there. And then another one, I'm going to fill up this little area right here. But it gets thinner there. And then thicker down here. So I'm going to kind of do it like random style. Just whatever happens there with that one. That's what's going to happen there. It's good to try to create things, have some sort of creative outlet. It's discipline ain't easy. It's probably the underlying subject that I'm talking about here is having a self-discipline. It's definitely easier to just kind of go through life and let things happen to you however it happens. And and what's kind of cool is or not cool, but I think one of the factors behind that is it's a lot like Satori or the actual onset of enlightenment. Like the onset of enlightenment is kind of like a realization that you're kind of on this ride, right? Like you realize that yourself is this mega complex organism that's not just water and flesh, this total organism that is self is like geologic, and there's like metal and stone and all sorts of aspects of self. The total self is the total environment, it's total everything. So there's this real geologic component of self. So there's no way to have a real conscious directive control over the vast majority of yourself. Like the vast majority of yourself is just kind of you, happening. It's not even really like you planning and being or doing. It's just kind of you just going on. And so when you get a sense of a feeling of that feeling, that sensation is like being on a raft in a river, going down the river and just floating on the raft. You're not steering, you know what I'm saying? You're not steering, but you're like in the channel. So like you're going like right past rocks, and you're going past all, you see all these horrible things that can happen to you just walking down the road. You know what I'm saying? Because one thing, like in bacterial wise, the amount of bacteria that exists on every inch of anything you touch it's appalling. But it's because of the siege warfare that exists topically all over your body that it's very difficult for competing bacteria to penetrate that war front. And that's what it is. I mean, if you looked at it at a microscopic scale, it's a war, dude. It's a huge war constantly going on all over your body with bacteria. They're fighting each other. And so you kind of like, you get this real sense of, well, holy shit, everything's just kind of taking care of me. Like, it's just, woof, like it starts to feel like fate. Like you're fated. Like nothing, no matter what, you're just going to kind of continue down this stream. And when you wreck, you're going to wreck. And who knows when. Ah! So you just go on the ride and you just kind of accept it. Well, I think that one of the fuels behind why people keep such a maladaptive perspective as that of the egotistical perspective is because it has rewards. There's a lot of rewards. They don't feel, in order to get to the other side, like, okay, well, what's on the other side? You have to go through this like ocean of boredom. You know what I'm saying? Ego is very entertaining. That's why, that for one is, when people are very egotistical, they're very entertainment focused. They're very focused on what kind of entertainment they're going to get, what entertainment they have. I'm going to take a drink here for a second. I wrote something really interesting down here. Okay, so this is kind of like a little a theory of mine, like kind of like a fantasy theory. Like how do we make evolutionary steps? How have we complexified over our existence as a species, as a singular being? Just we'll take the human genome, its complexities over the years. What have been the steps? How have the evolutionary steps? And one of the mechanisms behind that has been natural selection. They say animals will get into an area, and this is kind of a weird way of describing it. They don't really describe it. This doesn't really describe how evolution happens. This just describes how things die off. It's just saying there's a bunch of complexity that exists, and then the ones that fail die. But that doesn't answer how does this complexity form? Like, how do animals start to get different wings and stuff? Like, it's because they're trying to interact with their environment in this way, and some of them are successful and some of them aren't. And the breeding ones have longer beaks, and then they start knowing, and here's what I think that evolution has a conscious driver behind it. I feel that evolution has some sort of like a goal that's going after, and the goal is to survive. I think that maybe what if our next step in evolution is geologic, right? Because if you look at like how we came into being, like, the explanation that they give is that because our metabolism is a very interesting subject to research, and how they think that the evolution of the metabolism is very interesting. They think that it was like a bacteria that kind of took in this other bacteria, and it was like photosynthesis, like the evolution of photosynthesis. It's all very interesting. How did these energy centers join up with these other types of life forms like this? Like, because metabolism, it's almost like its own little like kind of life form type thing. So how and they say their explanation is that there was a conjoining of these different forms, these different life forms that existed that was beneficial. It was a symbiotic joining between these different bacteria that resulted in having more energy, and then that developed into a metabolism, which kind of became a multicellular creature, and it's a long explanation. But essentially, by introduction, right? How did evolution occur? By introduction. By these things were introduced, right? There was a bacteria that had this aspect. There was a bacteria that had this aspect. They were introduced to one another, and they cohabitated beneficially. So we have been introduced to geology on this level. We're now incorporating it into our bodies. Transhumanism is real. It's very real in our lifetime. We're going to see a lot of things happen and consider with transhumanism. Things are going to change, but in 2030, just look at the world we're going to see in 2030, man. It's unbelievable. Like, really, if I started saying some of the things that I think are going to happen, then a lot of people would just turn off to it until they did research into what technological theorists are actually have their 10-year plans. Like, you look at some of these technology firms and their 10-year plan. Well, that's 2030. And if you look at that 10-year plan, you want to do your own research on that, on the future of technology, and it's astonishing, and transhumanism and what's going on. And the debate that's raging in that field is, do we do this? Do we introduce this? And what is this going to do to our evolution? What is this? That's the very question that they have. I think that maybe, this total self that we are is trying to really consolidate into a singular being. There's a very real drive for us to know ourselves, which is, in essence, a consolidation. We're seeking consolidation. So maybe that's one of the evolutionary drivers, is actually consolidation of self. Like, if you look at it from a very macro level, as far, is that consciousness started out real separate. It didn't know what it was. And then it kind of like through time, it's kind of like consolidating into more complex forms that are gaining better understandings and able to measure itself. And there's this other aspect of self that's trying to conjoin. And maybe it's geologic. Maybe that's our next step in evolution, is geologic. And if you look at that, gold lasts forever. It doesn't tarnish and stuff. Like, rocks last a long time. If we fully merged with geology, that would extend our life cycle. Just in that theorem. Like, okay, so you become symbiotic with a form that doesn't have a life scale. You know what I'm saying? Like, and granted, it's a huge jump in evolutionary textual theory. because like we're all looking at evolutionary theory as a biological, as biology kind of mishapping its way through time. I have a fantasy that everything is consciousness and that it's oscillating through its existence. And in that, the nature of its existence is the oscillation of its existence. So we started out nothing, and eventually we're going to become one thing. Now, granted, this is just a fantasy, and there might be some backing behind it. There's some metaphysical and existential ideas that can back that up, I think. It's a fun theory to play with. It's a fun thing to think. Am I going to like sell my house and buy a boat and sail away because of that? No. Nope. No, that's not what I'm going to do. So knowing the self and how to do that, because there's this aspect of self that is very elusive, that the more you try to put your finger on it, the more it runs away. So it's a let statement. It's not an operational command like, this happens, therefore enact this feeling. No, it's a let command. It's let self be known. That would be the C++ language. In it would just be let self be known. It's just that easy. Or it's a let statement. It's you let it happen. But again, we can see where that feeling of ego can really step in, because we're so convinced, it's so easy to be convinced, that self is when you're doing it. Oh, this is me. I'm going bang, 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 bang. And you're going doing that. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're doing it. You can't deny it. You know what I'm saying? I think that's, I don't know if that's the best way to be seeing things. I think that's maladaptive and could lead to some really self-destructive behavior. But it's to identify with the full self, and it's just that easy, and you can say it. How do you walk the walk and how do you talk the talk on that? It starts with breathing. It's a good way to start everything, by breathing. So you start, you interpret some data, and you don't even assign anything to begin with. You just kind of let the data come in, and then watch how yourself reacts to, watch how your brain reacts to it, where it just kind of wants to put it. And I think that I don't think I was strong enough to do this like in the middle of a street in a huge crowd of public. In order for me to have got to where I could even perceive myself, like the true finale of, like the true totality of its essence, like its final essence, I don't think I would have been able to perceive that in any way had I not been in a very sterile environment. And I don't mean bacteria sterile. I mean sterile as in like not a lot of like TV, not a lot of music, not a lot of colors, not a lot of anything. In my life, I've gone, I've been to monasteries, and I've lived as a monk for periods of times. I've been to prison I've had a long prison stint. And prison is extremely sterile. Like there's no, it's just concrete walls everywhere. And so, having that sterile environment like that, it gives one the ability to really get quiet on a very, very deep, real level. And that's one thing that I think is necessary. You have to kind of get somewhere away from your common image of self. You might not have to go to jail. You don't have to go to a monk. You don't have to go to a monastery. You don't have to go to any one particular place unless that place is getting you out of your comfort zone. That's the primary thing that you want to do, is you want to get out of where your self-image, your egotistically based self-image, is not slammed in your face, you know what I'm saying, where you can escape it, essentially. You can get to a point where you don't have to be confronted with constantly seeing elements of that self, of that image. And so you got to get there. You got to get to where and you can probably do it in your mind, you know what I'm saying? Through the course of my experience in life, did not. I had these different experiences, and that's what I think that gave me the ability to understand some things about myself on a very, very deep, finite level. And so that might be one of the big steps in finding the self, is to kind of get away from yourself, as in the image of yourself. And there's like this course of action that you have to go through. There's like a test that you put yourself through. And everybody's test is a little bit different. And being in contact, really, I think a good way to go about this would be to start looking at your body and your brain as more of a tool instead of you. Seeing your various components of the brain is like a tool that operates the way it does. You know what I'm saying? You're not trying to see how things are supposed to operate. You are seeing how they're going to operate under their own stance. How do they want to operate? What is this going to happen naturally? You always got to make sure you're doing that. Otherwise, you start to create yourself instead of find yourself. But in that, you see something really, really potent, is that finding yourself when you're not creating yourself, you're not going to find anything. You get stuck in kind of this loop because you are creating yourself. If you do it long enough, if you search for yourself long enough, what you find out is that your search is self-searching, you'll find out after searching for the self long enough that the self is a searchingness, right? The self is a composite. Like when you look at a tree, it looks like one thing, but then you cut a tree down and you look and you see rings. You see that tree consists of year 1, 2, 3, 4, however many years, that it was an accumulation of that tree's existence that made what that tree is. And so that same element, that's actually a fundamental construct of reality. It's actually like a fundamental construct of construction, is how things are built, is based upon themselves, essentially. And so, there's a couple different ways you can, you kind of come to this point where it's like, this whole thing was stupid. This whole searching for the self and thing was stupid. There's no way you're going to figure it out. And there's no way I'm going to figure it out. And there's no way to know. And that's the answer. And that's the true, correct answer. It's not the full answer. The full answer is that what I just said, and because you're creating yourself constantly. Some people stop at that part. I don't know, and I'm not going to know, and I don't want to know because I don't understand. They get confused and they experience cognitive dissonance, and it's uncomfortable. So then they shed it. or you are honest and accepting with yourself. It's just that. That's how you know yourself, is you have to be honest and accepting. If you're not honest and accepting of yourself, then you're not going to see the true self. You're going to see this self-image. And then, like so here's one of the big problems with that, is that you'll see the self-image of yourself, and you might feel really good. You get rewarded from it. Be like, oh, yay, glory, I'm good. I got a good little snick snack treat there of happiness. I was thinking egotistically, and I got to feel good because I am good at this, right? So then you're thinking in that algorithm again. You're using the egotistical of like, what is me next? What do I get next? What am I going to eat next? Me, right? And then some things happen, some incongruencies occur. They always will. You know what I'm saying? Because you're not creating yourself consciously. You're seeing what you want to see yourself as, right? There's a difference there. You're seeing yourself as you want to see yourself. You're not creating yourself consciously. You're seeing yourself. And so the environment will produce incongruencies for you because of the conflict of reality, because your perspective is conflicting with true perspective. Anomalies will form, like it's inevitable. You will have incongruencies. You will see aspects of your reality that do not point to you being perfect. You know what I'm saying? Just kind of sum it up. Well, hey, I'm gonna kind of end this for now. Thanks for joining me, Darian. I see you commented over there. It's always a pleasure, my friend. It's always a pleasure. I offer you my blessings of peace and happiness. May these words come upon you and all that hear them, and may you find yourself in light. Be enlightened, my friend. Good day.